Good morning, good afternoon, and evening special to people in Oceania and Asia. Good evening to you. I'd like to thank World Data Congress for this opportunity to participate in this event on business impact of ChatGPT and generative AI. I'm Nilkanth. I'm not an expert on any of these areas, but yeah, I have a little bit of knowledge on multiple areas. I've largely worked with global 2000 companies to help them adopt and integrate these new technologies into their existing enterprise stack. I have more than about 20 years of experience on multiple fields. So let me just tell you what is it that I'll be covering. So first, of course, trying to give you a context of what I'm going to talk about, which is time-warping big data. I think evolution of AI, I think Bhushan did a fairly great job, the first presenter, whoever was there in that session. So I wherever I have seen in last presenters I've already covered, I won't go and do a deep dive in those. I'll probably just skim through those so that, I'm not repeating a lot of the things which have already been said. I want to spend a little more time on discriminative and generative AI because these are two areas which I think, kind of lead up to what I want to talk about later, which is how to leverage these particular two disciplines in AI to kind of, if you're an enterprise company and enterprise global organizations, to kind of leverage these two to kind of make those decisions. Then I'm going to talk about golden AI and the prediction engine, and then how to and what the golden use case is, and pretty much the last three slides is about the golden use case, and when it comes, I'll talk more about it. And this is a term coined by BCG and not by me. So I'll also give the right references. And last, I kind of end it with the economic potential of generative AI. I think it's very important. I heard some questions and people asking about how this will affect a common person like you and me. Are we going to lose jobs? And so I'll probably give perspective that the industry is talking about, people like McKinsey are talking about, and a little bit of my own personal perspective on this. So this is largely what I'll be covering. Yeah, just to set the context. So if the title of my topic kind of misled you, you're like a data scientist and you thought I'll be talking a lot about DTW or dynamic time warping, my sincere apologies. I won't be doing a deep technical discussion around dynamic time warping. It was kind of a hook, or you could say my hallucination, to kind of try to get you interested in this topic. Neither will I be talking about the time warp. For those Star Trek enthusiasts out there, we all know about the warp drive, which can potentially make human race into a intergalactic race, right? And actually, I always used to think that it was only fiction, but I actually realized that there's a person by the name of Miguel Alcubierre actually has proved that scientifically this is possible. And I think it just needs about 20,000 tons of TNT to be able to generate the distortion in space in front of your space vehicle for you to be able to do the warp drive. But what, like I said, I'll be focusing a lot on is how can you, as a business, as an enterprise, as a CEO, as an executive, really time warp what you already have as your enterprise infrastructure in terms of big data, in terms of analytics, in terms of your whole LLM models that you may have created, some discriminative AI stuff, your prediction engines. The idea is you've already built a lot of things, and then there is this whole new animal, generative AI, which came in late last year, and that seems to be just taking AI into the hyperdrive, right? So how do you kind of integrate all of these things together? And a lot of what I have put together is again based on what the industry is talking about, right? Some of it is there, some of it is yet to be developed, right? So all the references are there. So the slides will be shared. You can just click through and read in detail a lot of these things. I'll be covering a little more on the BCG one, which is the CEO's guide on AI revolution, and then there is the HBR article around how ChatGPT and AI will disrupt industry. One interesting thing I would ask everybody to read about is the Accenture's how generative AI basically will get enterprises to look at total enterprise reinvention, right? So pretty much all the material that you can read about generative AI, people are talking about generative AI as a huge fundamental way or invention for mankind, or something as big as the steam engine or electricity. Right. So that's basically setting the context so that at least you can expect or know what to expect in the next 20 odd minutes. So, let's look at the evolution of AI. I think it's an important slide because AI is not something, a lot of people know about AI because of all this generative AI. Of course, some of us are practitioners and have been working on it, but AI has been there for quite some time. And then just to compare that with, human evolution, I think it's important to understand why is there so much of focus on AI at this point of time. So, human beings, if you've read the history, the latest thing says that the first rock carving is actually 160 to about 200,000 years old. It's actually not the cave paintings in France, but actually two children about 200,000 years earlier in Tibet had left their handprints and footprints on a boulder knowingly, right? This is kind of known as the world's oldest cave art, and then it took about 100 to 150,000 years for us to actually develop language and speech. And that's what you can see on the left hand side in terms of human evolution from prehistoric to current. And then it took us again some more time. In fact, as alphabet probably just came in probably 6 to 7,000 years ago. This says about 2000 BC, but I think in the range of 6 to 7,000 years, right? And if you look at the same thing from an AI perspective, the first AI that was developed by a person by the name of Claude Shannon, for those who don't know, in 1950. And this system was called as a Theseus. It was actually built using an electric circuit. It actually had a mouse which could actually find its way through a maze, right? Fairly cool with the limited, computing power and other things. In fact, there was no computers in 1950. And we could actually develop something that could intelligently go through a maze. And then if you see, just before 2000, we've done handwriting recognition, speech recognition. And if you look at this data from our world in data, we are now at a stage where AI systems perform better than humans on pretty much a lot of these things, right? Which is amazing. I think that's where the opportunity. At the same time, there is also the fear that, what more can, AI do? And then this fear whether AI will take over the world and all those things. I think we are still quite far away. I mean, there are people who are doing work on that, and as per the current predictions, I don't think anytime before 2040, 2050 is the kind of time frame when AI is going to be better or smarter or have capabilities compared to the human brain, which includes the creativity, intellect, and all those things, right? So I think we have another 15, 20 years. Hopefully the regulations will come in. Going on to the next slide, like I said, there are a whole lot of different approaches to AI. Again, Bhushan talked about a lot about the different kinds of models. There are new models coming in as well, or new models which are work in progress. And if people are interested in knowing more, you can learn stuff like meta learning, which focuses on models or algorithms which leverage outputs from existing algorithms, right? That's one cool way. I think also Bhushan had in one of his slides few shot learning, and this is typically used in computer vision and other space where you don't have enough data, right? You need to have limited annotated data, and you need to kind of figure out the AI needs to figure out. And then there is explainable AI. This again will be used a lot in healthcare. I believe a guy might be using something like that, where you need trust. You need to really the user needs to know what is it that the AI is doing at the back end, and it's no longer a black box. And then folks from Web3 blockchain world would love federated AI, where and again, large enterprises would also allow federated AI, where you're really not sharing your private data, but just the private data and your private models kind of live with you, but you're still generating back to the open AI. And then others like quantum learning, which is the intersection between quantum computing and then swarm intelligence, which kind of mimics. And then of course the ultimate, which Neuralink, which Musk and company are working on, which is the man machine interface. So again, to answer one of the questions, I think the way this will really evolve is not one taking over the other, but really AI being an extension of our intelligence. So AI doing all the hard work, the computing and all those things, and human beings actually doing the creative stuff. Coming back to our topic, which is very, very relevant to our enterprise, Fortune Global 2000 company CEOs. There is discriminative that's been used immensely. People have written prediction models, have made prediction engines. The fundamental difference is, discriminative AI focuses on modeling, the decision boundary between different classes or categories, and this approach is more, concerned with classification and prediction tasks. So once you're able to, kind of draw that line, between two classes of data, it, basically makes a fairly good prediction. And this is something that can be used for, forecasting how much stock you need to have and so on and so forth. Right. So that is discriminative AI, is already in use, already being used by companies. And then, of course, generative AI, which we heard and will be hearing more all throughout the day. It really kinds of tries to aim to understand the underlying patterns and structures of data, right? And it's obviously trained in a large corpus of data, and once it does that, it's able to do things like generate images, do text synthesis, do anomaly detection, and data argumentation, right? So obviously, the point is generative AI is not going to replace other forms of AI. It's going to augment other forms of AI, and intelligently using the two, and also leveraging your existing investments that you've made in your existing AI models, is something that organizations can really focus on. So going on to the next slide, is where the meat of the discussion is all about. So the idea is, I can obviously use generative AI, and everybody in my industry is going to be using generative AI. So me as a CEO, how do I really approach this new animal, right? How do I, obviously there are concerns around privacy, there are concerns around data leak. I think some of the speakers spoke about that. There are concerns about confidentiality, my IPs, my code, my assets going on to a public platform. All those concerns are there, but at the same time, there is this opportunity as well as there is competition. So if my competitors are able to leverage generative AI and make themselves more productive, make their employees more productive, for example, create chatbots. I think in one of the presentations, I think again it was Bhushan talked about, he landed in India and he could, Airtel did not have a conversational kind of a bot. And if my competitors are able to do it faster than me, then obviously there's going to be my customers are going to move away from me, right? But those are business as usual. Those are things that you need to do. And what BCG, again, is a very good study. It's publicly available. You can just download it. It calls about CEO's roadmap to generative AI. It really talks to the CEO, telling him, hey, let the technical stuff be done by the techies, right? You need to focus on whether this is going to transform your enterprise. So it cannot be just automating one part of your organization, like support function, or getting your marketing team to leverage this to create blogs, content, and so on and so forth. I mean, those are things which anyway will be done and have to be done. But really looking at business use cases, how do I leverage what I already have? Currently in my traditional AI ML domain, and build a moat. And this is again going back to how do I build a warp drive for my business. There's again a very beautiful book, Power and Prediction, though this book was actually released before ChatGPT was released, but very, very relevant. And these same folks, these are folks from one of the Canadian universities, they had written prediction engines. And this is like the second in those series of books. It's a beautiful book, and it's very relevant again to this discussion that we are having, right? And to the questions that most of these CEOs have, what do I need to do with this new generative AI that I have? And here they talk about an example of electricity. And I think a lot of people say that, generative AI is what electricity was for mankind, or agriculture was for, mankind. That disruptive. But if you really dig deep into electricity and how much time it took for electricity to get adopted, it took many, many, many years. And the reason for that was it was used here and there in nooks and corners of organization, but until and unless it started being used across the enterprise, unless and until there was a systems thinking, electricity really did not become mainstream, right? So So I think that combination of this book and the BCG study, I think, is a fairly good guide to executives who are trying to make decision as to how I can, leverage this new technology. And the two, I think, easy areas, or the two, I think, easy to pick up areas are, recommendation engines and, fraud detection, right? You can, again, recommendation engines can be called as similarity search. The only difference is, Google uses similarity search, but this is similarity search for your business. Similarity search which has context to your business, which your customers can leverage, right? Fraud detection, anomaly detection in your business. You're a telco and you want to figure out, for example, anomaly, right? Fraud is very specific to fraud, but anomaly could be, for example, there is an outing. I'm launching 5G, services, and there is an outage somewhere, in some part. How do I, kind of figure out where that outage is, right? Or, I am the public health department, or, I take care of all the water bodies and sewage and other things, and there is some water which is, I think there was a very interesting case study in the US, where they had contamination in some of the water pipes, and they actually leveraged AI to kind of predict and figure out where exactly that was. So anomaly detection or fraud detection. I think these are the opportunities, and the BCG's roadmap kind of gives you a good way in which you can kind of make those decisions. Now, you have two options as a business leader. Either you fine tune an existing model. I think, again, one of the speakers did speak about, so there is already an existing LLM model that is there available in the open space. I kind of just fine tune it and make it relevant for my business, make it work with my data, and I'm done, right? And again, studies say that could cost anything in the range of 2,000 to $8,000, $10,000. In fact, a specific experiment done by, I think, Snorkel AI in the legal space, they realized that fine tuning an LM model to complete a complex legal classification costs in the range of $8,000 to $10,000. Right? Whether that makes business sense, yes, it's a small amount of money. If that can kind of automate something that I can do for my business, it's a good ROI. But that's business as usual. And then, of course, there is this question that you need to ask yourself: is how do I need to really create a new model, or do I need to train a new model? Right? Fine tuning and training is totally different. And just to again give you stats available in open domain, OpenAI, spent about $12 million on a single, training run for GPT-3, and it takes, multiple rounds of training. But they spent about $10 million, and so on and so forth. So it's in millions of dollars, right? And these are just single runs. So if you need to train a new model, or even an existing model with your data, it's going to cost you in millions of dollars. But maybe these millions of dollars might be a good investment, because this could be the mode. Because just fine tuning and spending a couple of $1,000, that is something that a competition can do, and that's kind of really the big question. Now here again, the cost that I'm talking about for training or a new model is just for training once. And then beyond that, there is costs associated with data center, with compute, with storage, with talent, and all of those would be equivalent, if not more, than the cost of training, right? So it is a real fairly large amount of investment. The idea is to figure out if that investment can time warp your business and build your mode. Right? So these are the questions I'm sure every boardroom, every CEO is talking. And what I wanted to cover is what are the opportunities, and what can I do with my existing investments? What can I do with my existing data, with my existing LLM models? So, and that's pretty much my next slide. So how do you kind of discover and develop your golden use case? So on the right, your golden use case which you talked about is your recommendation, or your similarity search and fraud detection, or your anomaly detection. And then potentially all of this can extend into natural language understanding, fraud detection, fault detection, IoT based automation, surveillance, security, so on and so forth. Right? In the finance world, I think we had one of the trading folks earlier in the call today who talked about how they're leveraging AI or generative AI for algorithmic trading and trading. Algorithmic trading is still discriminative, but generative AI can be leveraged for that as well. So how do you really kind of do it, and what is the kind of system that you probably already have in place, and what's new, right? I think one big area that a lot of companies, at least the ones I have been speaking to is really looking at now IoT, right? The streaming data. You will have 5G, which will be implemented, at least in this part of the world. It's in the early stages of implementation. So you have a lot of IoT data that's coming, data at the edge that's going to come in, right? So you need to have a capability to kind of capture your real-time data. Right? So you need time series kind of data. And again, sorry, going back to my dynamic time warping, you need a time series kind of data. So there's a very interesting article by Forbes. I'll again put the link here: the rise of vector databases. So vector databases have been there for quite some time, and in fact are being used. Like I said, some of those examples where people use vector databases, especially for those vector embeddings when it comes to unstructured data. Essentially, you're converting your unstructured data into a numerical form, right? So there are 5 stages largely. Again, thanks to KDB folks for this image, right? So the first stage is to kind of ingest your data from external databases. Like I said, it could be ETL or streaming data sources or others. The second step is to kind of really aggregate that data, summarize it, clean it, prepare the data, and for the organization, and keep it in the data store, right? And then then the third stage really comes in. That's where you start having your built-in algorithms. These algorithms helps you encode your vector embeddings into a database. And then there is the consume phase. So that's the new phase, right? So for people who have been using vector databases, time series, and so on and so forth, the first 3 stages are really something that you've been doing. In fact, people have also been doing the consume phase using popular programming languages like Python, SQL, or others, right? But then there is again this generative AI where you have prompt, right? So you have natural language, you have English language by which you can kind of query. So you have a new way in which you can actually query your database. So you can query and ask questions. And then at the end, at the bottom, you have your MATLABs, data integrations, your business intelligence, Tableau, and all those things. So most of the things on the left are things that you already have in place, and then the things on the right is what you really need to fix. But while you're doing all these things, one thing that you cannot forget about is large language models are extremely I would say not sustainable, in the sense, from in terms of the consumption or the compute or the storage that they really need, right? So they are not sustainable solutions, and the world moving towards a more sustainable planet, and carbon credits and all those things, it takes in a lot of energy, right? So the idea is, what do I do to kind of make this all easier for me, cost effective, and at the same time I'm not consuming a lot of compute, memory, and other things. So it's going to be a costly, right? So again, I gave you some indicative figures. So this system, having this whole system to work for you is going to be, very, very costly kind of solution. So one of the potential solution on making this golden use case real, really delivering on this, promise of the golden use case is having a system like this, right? You have your unstructured data, which goes through your LLMs and your transformers to have vector embeddings, and it's put in your vector database. And then you have your real-time streaming, historical as well as IoT data, which goes to a large data model, right, LDM. I would love to call this LLDMs, like large language and data model. So if you have some system which can capture both the data from a large language model as well as large data, and you have a capability wherein you potentially even don't need to use a programming language. It could be again a ChatGPT kind of interface where you can use a natural language interface to kind of actually ask those questions, to do those similarity search. So what if you can actually query your vector DB using natural language? I think that's what is going to make this powerful, because then the users of this will move from your data scientist to your so-called new job that's coming, called as prompt engineers, and like prompt engineers, business users, people who really have understanding. And again, one more important point in this whole thing is, if you don't have understanding of the domain, if you don't have the domain knowledge, this thing is not going to work, right? So if you actually have users who understand the business, doing this querying and actually using their intelligence to do all of these things, this system becomes more effective. The system actually helps companies to build their moat. So I mean, that's largely what it is. And kind of to kind of to end my discussion, this is again a McKinsey study. It's available, publicly available. It talks about the economic potential of generative AI. So it will answer some of these questions, dispel some of these myths of saying AI will take away jobs. AI will potentially take away roles, right? Someone is doing something, say support, it would probably take away the role the person is doing, but with the right training and the right skilling, that person would be doing something better, more creative, right? And that's what, and this is a good feel good report, right? I mean, someone like McKinsey saying, these are like the 4 places where a lot of the companies, and every CEO, every boardroom guy is going to look at this report, right? So what is the economic potential? And what this report really says is it's not going to mean, hey, I'm going to make money by cutting jobs, but actually I'm going to make my organization productive. So it talks about labor productivity. It talks about an increase of labor productivity, I think 0.1 or 0.6% annually till 2040. And, that kind of labor productivity improvement equals to what's 2.6 trillion to about 4.4 trillion dollars annually, right? And that's like the GDP of the third, fourth, and fifth largest countries in the world, right? UK, India, and Japan, right? In that order, 2.6 to 4.4. So, or rather, India, UK, and Japan. Yeah, UK, India, Japan, right? Correct. So that's the kind. Whenever we've seen that countries or economies GDP improves, the benefits actually go back to the people, or at least theoretically, in a good world, in a democratic world, it should kind of flow back to the people, back to scaling, back to education, and back to getting people to do what they should be doing. More creative things, more fun things. I can tell you out of my own personal experience. Again, there was a question earlier to the earlier speaker, right, on will conversational AI and search, kind of replace, Google search? It may not. I mean, people will use both, right? I still use Google search. I would still use ChatGPT. I would still use a ChatGPT interface for my own organization, something what Bhushan talked about in the first presentation, which is further enhanced with my own LLMs and with my own big data to, completely transform at the way I look at things. So I probably would look at how do I leverage all this data, this intelligence, and this information, which will augment me to do more creative, more strategic things. What should the company be doing next? What are the kind of areas the company should be focusing on? So I think the opportunity is huge. And again, on the right hand side, you can kind of see the kind of money or the savings or the kind of impact that generative AI could really have on businesses. So I think I'd like to end on a very positive note. I think we live in very, very exciting times. I'm sure many of you in this in the audience today are probably much younger. But for me, who's seen everything from a mainframe, in fact, even before mainframe, who's not had a telephone at his house, to actually having worked on a mainframe that also Honeywell Bull, which was outdated when I worked on it, to actually see the era of generative AI and augmented AI and brain and machine interface. I think it's very exciting time. So I will end with that positive note. I'm very positive. I'm very bullish about this whole, not just for businesses, but I think for humanity and mankind as well, of course, with the right regulations, checks and balances in place. So, some references. I think most of the slides, I have the links, but again, the BCG study, the McKinsey guide to vector databases, the rise of vector databases, world in data, power and prediction, beautiful book, Power and Prediction. I would recommend if you are interested in the economics of artificial intelligence, because I think any technology can only survive and thrive if there's economics behind it, right? If there is a potential for it to help make money. Otherwise, it's technology for technology's sake, right? And yeah, that's it. Again, I used some AI generator to generate these slides, so I should give credit to those guys as well. So thank you, Slides Go, Flatticon, and FreePick for helping me generate this slide. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me on Twitter or send me an email reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'd like to take it. I think I took about 28 minutes, 2 minutes more than what I should.
Can I
Yes,
ask a
Mohammed,
question?
yeah, you can ask your question, Mohammed.
Very good presentation, Nilkanth. So I had this question I earlier asked about, will chat be used, right? Will generative AI be replace chat? But now there is one keyword that people are using in place of SEO, search engine optimization. There is a new keyword people are using, this chat GPT engine optimization, or whatever you can call it. People are calling it CEO now. Basically, chat GPT engine optimization. So mainly when you're using Bard or you're using these type of tools, when you're searching something, like now people are going to start more and more searching. And I asked Martin also, the numbers Google is expecting that there will be at least 10 to 20% market share will lose to the from search to these tools. But I don't want to go for the numbers, but I want to go for this word that I'm saying. Now, how can I, as an individual who has spent so many years to make sure that I am coming on SEO, how will I now make sure I'm also coming in on the conversational AI when people are searching for some services? My company and my something about me also comes up there. So that engine optimization, right? Like I'm sure if you are using Bard, it comes down. References are from these links. So how can a business, because this is a new thing that many companies are doing research on. Do you have any thoughts on this? How can because now you know, right, how much time we have spent on SEO since the last 20 years when there was PageRank, when it started with PageRank, it started with backlinks, and then so many things emerged. We kept changing our business. Now we have a completely new, different tool to fight with. So what are your thoughts on that?
Great question. Thanks, Mohammed. I think, see, fundamentally, what you need to understand, at least the current ChatGPT or whatever is available, right? It has been trained only on data till September 2021. So one is it does not compete with your standard search. So if I need to search something which is relevant for me today, like for example, I want to search what is Mohammed talking about in the area of AI. The best that ChatGPT can give me is what you spoke in some conference a year and a half back in September 2021, and not something that probably you've spoken today. So I think, so I won't do a comparison from that perspective until unless, of course, and I don't think ChatGPT, at least in the short term, is going to make it connected to the internet, right? It's not going to use live data. It may have connectors and other things. I think the earlier speaker kind of showed some parts of it to other APIs and other products, which may in turn be live. But again, it depends, right? Regulation might stop it. We don't know. But I don't think if you really look at it, I think we're a little bit away from comparing them as, apples to apples, right? It's because the data in ChatGPT or most of the generative AI tools that may be there is old data. They've been trained on older data. The second thing is they've been trained on a data and a data set. Google essentially has access to all information on the internet in real time. So it's just different, right? So it really, that's why I again said, right, I will use both. If I need to find out, like today, what happened at the World Data Congress 2023, you type that in ChatGPT, it will say, hey, I'm sorry, I do not have access data before September 2021. Or maybe if you have those premium version that the earlier speaker had, which I have also not tried, I need to try. Maybe it has some plugins which can say, these are the news, this got featured in some Fox News or some other things. And, it was a great conference and we had these great questions. So that's why you still cannot compare it. Then coming back to, I think, again, generative AI, the power, I really feel, again, I'm more in the B2E, a B2B space. I'm not a B2C person so much. Search engine optimization is again, fundamentally a B2C word, but again, it's very, very useful in B2B. But in the B2B space, I think the most important thing is relevance to your product, to your data. The biggest challenge or the opportunity that I see, I mean, you can go to any website of any company, use the AI that they have. It's really very rudimentary, right? They are not able to conversational, or in fact, there is not even conversational. Even if it is partially conversational, they're not able to give you answers on fundamental questions that you ask. Right? You need to keep selecting options, and then only when you are run out of all the options, it will connect you to an actual agent, which I'm hoping is actual agent sitting at the back end. I think that's the opportunity in the short term that we can really get, right. And those are the kind of searches specific to my business, which I think I can improve a lot. And then when, of course, at some point of time, ChatGPT is looked at it as a search engine per se, then I think we can talk about what you're asking. But the question is a valid one. The thing is, I don't think I have an answer to this at this point of time.
Yeah, I was not more talking about ChatGPT, because I know ChatGPT is on old data, but I'm talking about Bing AI and BART, the recent Google and Microsoft, they have released the conversational search. There people that I was asking in that context, but thank you for your.
Yeah, like I said,
Thank you. I have a question, please.
Yes,
I have a question. Yes, thank you. So thank you for the presentation. You have talked about the economic potential of generative AI. So my question is, some people are nowadays talking about the ethical issues with AI in general. So what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, see, one is, I think one of the speakers talked about hallucination, right? That is one thing. The second is you really don't know what the AI has been trained on. So if your data itself is corrupt, like for example, in a racial scenario, right? If your data is trained for, I think the longevity CEO talked about it, right? They have taken representation samples of Americans, Europeans, but Asians, right? Asia, India. So if I take the same example, India has probably the youngest population in the world, vis-a-vis Japan, which has probably the oldest population in the world. So it's always going to be impossible to train your data to cover, so many different kinds of parameters. So, so there is always going to be bias, right? There is going to be bad actors. There are going to be people who will leverage this power, just like we have cyber terrorists, using, for that matter, even the Web3 world, right? I mean, Web3 or blockchain, the promise of blockchain is you have a record of every transaction, but still you see hacking, you still see, money laundering, though in reality, though the hype about it is more, in reality, the amount of frauds that happen with your traditional banking system is much, much higher compared to the Web3 world. But still there is, right? So I don't think those problems are ever going to get solved. And generative AI is not probably even equipped. And I think that's where the regulation comes. I think someone needs to start writing and drawing those lines saying, hey, like your system should have these minimum capability. Like, for example, if I'm sorry, Guy, but if I'm a health app, right, you should have representative samples of Hispanic, Asian, European, Scandinavian. This is like a basic requirement. I'm sure HIPAA or some of those guidelines when it comes to health, that is there. So I think it's important that a lot of the different regulations that already exist. So you have HIPAA, you have FDA, you have content related guidelines, you have data related, your GDPR. So you need to get all these regulations, and somebody needs to sit to figure out what parts of these are relevant to AI, so that whenever a company is promising something, you have a guideline, you have a standard to kind of verify if it is complying to that. See, it's not going to solve. It's like how Facebook, kind of grew, right? I mean, it grew so big that it's very difficult. What we are trying to do with Facebook, or for the matter, any social media, Twitter, it's become so big. It's very difficult now to set policies, right? You need to get an Elon Musk who comes and cleans up the organization. It's very difficult. It's not possible. So I think AI is bigger than all of these things. It can shape fundamentally the way human minds can think or be made to think. So I think it's very important that these regulations are in place. So organizations as well as bodies have ways to make sure people are compliant to. This is my thought. Again, not an expert on either compliance or ethical issues.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so
Did I
much.
answer the question, Farah, or was it way off?
Well, that marks the Q&A session for Nilkanth. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. It was great interacting with all of you.